Look, I opened this jar of rotten baby food, and a butterfly came out.
Wow, that's interesting. Oh, that's very interesting. No, if I had to say punching up versus punching down,
Welcome to the Comedians and Elevators podcast. I've got my guest, Daniel Montenegro. Daniel, say hi, introduce yourself, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
yeah. Hey, everybody. My name is Daniel Montenegro. I am a filmmaker from the Southwest. Currently doing a festival circuit for my crew's upcoming film, The League of Warriors.
Very cool. League of Warriors. You want to tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah. The League of Warriors is a quirky little road trip comedy. There are three friends who run a local arcade bar, and they have to do some questionable things in order to save their bar.
Ah, okay. Is it a comedy?
It is a comedy, yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, shall we get into it?
Let's do it.
All right. So the main topic of the podcast is to compare and contrast the comic versus the comedian. So I define the comic as any person telling funny jokes versus the comedian who's a funny person telling any jokes. So would you agree that most start as a comic and evolve into a comedian?
Ooh, do I agree with it? I'm not sure if I agree completely. I think comics are very just excellent in their craft and what they do. They're able to set us up with, these things to ponder and think about and then knock us down. So with the comic, when you're going to see stand up, it's like being in a boxing match. And, I want to get this type of witty relief, in my mind, and I'm getting jabbed for, the punchline, and then eventually I get that right hook. A comedian
Hmm.
seems just like a character who really wants to be loved by all and to love all. I think you can evolve into both. Somebody like Dave Chappelle, I think he does it well. I think he is the comic and the comedian at the same time. But yeah, I think, does that answer your question?
It does. I'm just now curious about the analogy. Have we got some uppercuts? Are we going to do some kicking or what else can we throw at it?
Yeah. You're gonna hear a lot of uppercut analogies and roundhouse kicks. I'm a big fan
Nice.
of everything anime, so you'll probably hear a lot more.
All right, all right. Well, we're going to have to work those moves into it. All right, so let's start with the first question. So it's about the role of persona in comedy. So, how much of the comedian's voice is a character versus their real self?
I think the comedian's voice, there has to be some authenticity and truth into what they're doing whenever they perform, whether this be in any type of narrative setting or improv setting.
Mhm.
There has to be some truth for the audience in order to make it believable. But they say in comedy with writing, you should always amplify your characters. Have you heard this before? Amplify a character by 10 to make it more interesting.
I mean, I get the general idea, but the scale, so 10 is like a scale factor. How do you do it?
Well, I think I don't know if it's an easy feat to do, mind you. I'm still trying to write narratives as well and make them interesting for characters. But just different things I've heard through the grapevine. You want to be yourself, but amp it up to a level that makes it more charming and more magnetic for the audiences. So with that regards, I do think a comedian needs to have some truth within their character, but I don't think that it's necessarily 100% authentic to who they are.
Okay, so would you say authenticity matters or is the illusion part of the magic?
I think it's both. For me, a comedian, it seems more uh, that illusion is more part of the magic, and there needs to be a little bit of sprinkle of authenticity.
Okay, so you sprinkle. Okay, so now we're getting into that. So the sprinkle may be that scale factor that gets us to 10 somehow, right?
Yeah,
A little
exactly.
bit of the magic
Ex-
sauce. All right. All right, let's make it a little more difficult. So punching up versus punching down. Where do comics versus comedians stand on this? And let me put in some historical context. Did a jealous medieval prince become the first comedian by killing the court jester?
Ooh, I've never heard that actually before. Can you repeat that once more?
Did a jealous medieval prince become the first comedian by killing the court jester?
Wow, that's interesting. Oh, that's very interesting. No, if I had to say punching up versus punching down, I think comics have a lot more freedom in this arena. And I like to see comics punch up. I'm a big fan of, a character, I'm biased, like Robin Hood, right? Kind of take from the rich, give to the poor. So I like to see comics punch up. Comedians, they seem nowadays, everybody who, in my humble opinion, they want to be a little bit more safe, a little bit more PC. Versus a comic, we kind of know what we're getting into. We know what we're going to see. Otherwise, we wouldn't be going to their show. Um, I think a comic can punch down as well, but it has to be done tastefully, right? If you can do it tastefully and intelligently, I don't see anything wrong with punching down. But definitely punching up is more of my avenue to go.
Can you point to an example of tastefully punching down?
The only example, so I don't have one off the top of my mind from a certain comic per se
Well,
right
look,
now.
one threw me out at me when you said that is Al Bundy when he would always pick on the French, right? He's punching down, but is it really?
I see what you're saying. I forgot about All Bunny. That's hilarious.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh,
What about
definitely.
I
That's
think
a
what if you can punch down, but you're in the same social dynamic and circle, right? I mean, then it would be kind of like, well, we're in the same boat, right?
Yeah, that's why I brought up Al Bundy because really, I mean, how can you punch down? It doesn't make sense. Like he's doing it, it's the style, but is it really?
Yeah, I definitely like it. I think it can be done, very well. Yeah, just tastefully.
Okay. So is the audience agreement with the comedian a form of permission or alignment?
With the comedian,
The comedian, or perhaps the comic.
the comic is tougher for me, Keenan. That's that more of your wheelhouse. I'm not 100% confident in that arena, but I think with the comedian, I think it needs to be more in alignment. Um, which they're going to be seeking out that comedian and that character because there's something charming about that comedian. There's something magnetic about their personality. And I think of any narrative or story, we want to follow along the protagonist, the main hero of that story, because there's something we want to learn from them, or we just want to take a little bit of time out of our day to spend hanging out with them. And I think that's the same thing for comedians. Now, I don't think we necessarily have to be 100% agreeing with what they're doing or saying, but we have some ballpark idea and alignment into what they're teaching us.
Okay. All right. So let's throw it into the cultural translation of comedy. So how do jokes that work in one country bomb in another?
I love this. I love this question. It's probably one of my favorite questions. I think a comic who studies their craft and really trains and rehearses and understands the culture they're going to can succeed for sure. If they were to break down social barriers and they were to break down things like language, of course, right? Language is huge. It's key, obviously, no matter where you go. Then you might be able to appeal to the mass, right?
Mhm.
But if we don't take those steps, then there's just no way your jokes are going to go over the head of that culture, right? When we think about narratives, I mentioned this earlier, but I like a lot of Japanese anime or dramas or comedies. And I was just recently watching a Japanese comedy. It's a cool little love drama comedy. I'm going to out myself here. This is one of my embarrassing ones to mention, but I don't mind. There's this one called Mischievous Kiss, Love in Tokyo. It's just really great, just romance comedy. And in that culture, they do a lot of big facial expressions with their actions. So the camera will hold on them in these type of shots where we get to really see this expression across their face and their mannerisms, where that might not translate to the American culture when we see movies or TV shows. We're going to wonder, well, why are we just hanging on this character so long, seeing this big facial expression? And it's really more in line with stuff we used to see back in Hollywood from the 1920s and 30s from actresses like Katharine Hepburn or Cary Grant. They were just these big personalities, and we don't see that anymore. So the long about answer here, I think that's how you may be able to bomb in another country and succeed in one other.
Speaking of big characters that kind of look with those things, it reminds me of John Cena. I know you're like, what? John Cena? I think he's got that quality that you're describing, and also the component of bombing in another country. So we're going to move on from that one. I'm going to let that one linger. So are comics more universal while comedians are more culturally specific?
I do believe that a comic is more universal, just because they're scientists with their craft. I respect comics completely, and it's so nerve-wracking. There's no way I could ever get up on stage and do stand-up. I want to just go and enjoy that, you know. I think if they study and they got their routine down to the science and they know beat by beat, there's no reason why they can't be more universal than a comedian. Comedians, just with culture nowadays, as soon as they slip up one time, or we're out the door with them. We're like,
Mm.
well, we didn't expect that of you. We thought you were this, type of personality. Now you're leaning more towards this way. So it's very easy to get canceled in today's culture for a comedian versus a comic. I think we already know what we're getting into.
So a comedian can get canceled for not sticking to the script?
Well, no, think about this. A comedian, going back to it, they're universal, right? But what if they break away, right? A lot of time comedians are performers and they're big on improv, right?
Mm.
So they've studied that type of way. There might be a little method, and I don't know if they can necessarily 100% always adhere to their script
Okay.
when they're
All right.
performing as a comic, because they're not comics, in my humble opinion. There's some great ones who can do both, and they're magicians with what they do, but most comedians are just actors we want to see out there being goofy, in my humble opinion.
Okay. Well, that leads to crowd work versus crafted work. So, if comics riff like influencers and comedians perform like in reaction videos, where is the sweet spot?
Hmm. comics Comics working the crowd. I'd rather see a comic build rapport with the crowd in the beginning of their set, possibly just to get that bond and get any type of anxiety out of the way between the audience and the comic. But I think it's up to the comic to really dictate the flow of that show, and really just stick to their beat by beat routine. And we can really all achieve something wonderful, by watching their show. Now, with a comedian, I don't know if crowd work is necessarily good for a comedian, because they're, like you said, they're trying to stick to a script. But what happens when they're posed with hecklers, right? And that might throw off their whole entire day. I don't want to see. Think of somebody like Robin Williams from the '90s, right? Robin
Mhm.
Williams had this big energy and this explosive type of charisma. He was just wonderful at what he did, and I think he was more of a comedian in my humble opinion, at that time. And I would hate to see crowd work go wrong for somebody like him in the '90s, versus the comic. So I don't know where the sweet spot is to give you the short
Okay.
answer.
Well, how about when a comic leans too much into crowd work or when a comedian gets heckled?
Yeah, a comedian gets heckled, like I said, that's heartbreaking for me. I don't want to see it if I don't have an answer. But I think a comic can control that crowd a little bit more, but he's got to ring it in and I think jump back to their respected set. Because nobody wants to see this tennis match between the crowd and the comic, right? We're there to see the comic. There, in our eyes, we just want to spend time with them. And I don't want to see a tennis match going back and forth between the comic and the audience, as an audience member, just speaking for myself.
Okay. All right. Most important question: advertising and self promotion. Who advertises themselves more, the comic or the comedian or the magician? You know that place where you're not conscious and you're not sleeping either? That's your power bill to the electric company. Right here. I want us to be here with free energy, where the Wardenclyffe Tower meets the Eiffel Tower. But that's not where we are. We are here, where you've got the utility and you've got residential solar. Between these two, we know which one saves you money. This is where we can go in the meantime. But this is where I want us to be now, and this can be done now. So let me deputize you to represent DOSE, Department of Solar Efficiency, and let's get on the podcast and get the message out today. See you soon.
Oh, That's great. I want to lean towards the magician and get off topic because I'm a big magic dork, right? So no, but let me see here. The comic or the comedian? I think it's equal nowadays. I don't see either one doing less work. I think it's very important and vital that both advertise themselves.
Okay. So is self-promotion seen as selling out or is it necessary for survival?
No, I think there was a time where self-promotion probably was deemed that way, maybe in the 90s, right? We had a lot of indie culture, just booming and rising. But I think nowadays it's more a sign of strength in this culture. You need it to survive. Well, we got these big, studios and production companies all around the world behind how they advertise. So the gap could seem, really just very steep to climb, right? So why not use those tools that are at your disposal?
Okay. All right. So censorship and offense. Does a comic avoid offense while a comedian courts it to prove a point, like a magician?
I think it's opposite.
Okay.
I don't mind if a comic does it tastefully because I enjoy it. I enjoy that witty banter. As long as they do it tastefully and intelligently, then I'm okay with it. But a comedian, I think they'll shy away from it a little bit more.
Hmm.
And I don't know necessarily. I know, like, speaking of Robin Williams, going back to his set, A Night with Robin at the Met, right? From the '90s, he would bring up some ideas about certain things about social, things that were going on in society and pose this very philosophical view on his set, right? But I don't know if a comedian always has that necessary, I don't know. I mean, liberal freedom or as much freedom as a comic would have.
So then who survives better in the cancel culture environment? The comic, comedian, or magician?
Oh, definitely the comic.
Okay.
Definitely the comic. Yeah.
All right. All
Comedians
right.
comedians are cool, right? But I think I could see a comic performing 20, 30, 40 years plus. I wouldn't mind that. Versus comedians, no offense, it's all great and congratulations to everybody, who gets their shine. But a comedian after 5, 10 years, their star power, who's next up? Who's next up? What other comedians next? It's like that.
Unless they transform themselves.
Of course, you could be transformative in any role. You could shift to drama. You could shift to another median. Absolutely.
So you're really
Probably.
saying that the character has to completely just deviate from its authenticity and become something completely different.
See, and I'm not biased at because I like to write narrative and stories. So I do love comedy, but I love drama at the same time and romance and period pieces, right? So I don't mind if a character does that from time to time. I think it'll promote their longevity if they're interested in that.
Hmm. All right, all right. So timing and delivery, science or art. So do comics rely more on structure and comedians more on rhythm and emotion?
I completely agree with you with this. I think comics definitely rely more on structure. They practice and rehearse their set and they know beat by beat, and they've just trained it out there set after set, show after show. I think they do rely on it. And I think the comedian definitely relies more on their charisma and that rhythm and that type of well, how's the audience reacting to this?
Hmm.
And I think the more, I mean, I'm sure this works with comics as well, but I think comedians, they see the audience, swooning over them, they're going to just, feed off that energy a lot more.
Okay. So laughter versus applause. Are comics chasing laughs and comedians chasing applause breaks that validate the message?
I think with a comic, I'd love to see them chase the laughter and the applause, right? There's been times where I've seen comics and they've been so witty and intelligent and I could not think of how they came up with their ideas, right? And it just really is so soothing to me, and so inspiring to see an angle or a spin on something that I hadn't seen before. So not only will you get the laugh out of me because you're creating the shock value, but also I'm going to applaud you too. So I think a comic should chase both, in my opinion. A comedian, I think they're chasing more just the laughter. I think they're just chasing more after laughter, because a comedian to me is more of a live performer as far as like doing improv. So a comedian, in my humble opinion, wants to be loved and to love, right? So I think they're chasing more laughter.
Okay. All right. So comedy as commentary. When does a comedian cross into being a philosopher or a preacher?
You said a comedian?
I, I would say the comedian, but if you think a comic is doing that, maybe name one, but you tell me.
No, no, I don't think a comic is. I just wanted to clarify. A comedian doing I think a lot of comedians can do that, possibly, get philosophical and get preachy, right?
Mhm.
Just because maybe they want to be seen in a different light, right? Maybe they want audiences to get to know a little bit more about them and their personality and what they find interesting, which is great. But personally, I'd rather see a comic doing their set and riffing in person than before. I'd like to go see a comedian, honestly. So I wouldn't want to see a comedian riff and talk about philosophical points of view and get preachy because I don't feel like that's what I'm investing in them for, right? If I wanted to do that, I feel like I could transfer into another medium to go see that.
I see. Okay. I think so. It's the character work of the comedian that you rather see as drama. Does that sound correct?
Um, in some senses, I guess that's not incorrect, but no, I don't want to see the comedian get too over philosophical and too preachy, like you said. I don't mind them getting into drama for sure. There's some great comedians who can do that in narratives, and it's wonderful to see, right? This type of dry satire, which is just excellent on screen, and I think great examples of artists who do that are people like Jim Carrey, who's done that as well. Robin has done that. Will Ferrell's done that as well, which is just excellent, right? But I'd personally rather see Will Ferrell doing more of his, charisma, magnetism, charm, kind of goofy silliness versus him getting more philosophical and pontificating. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Because so would you see that it's diluting the humor when they do that?
I do think it dilutes the humor for sure. I've invested in your character, and I've seen your character as this way, and it interests me so much. And to see you change it makes me feel like I got gypped a little bit.
Okay. All right. I can go with that. All right.
Yeah.
So, comedy and vulnerability. I would argue that comics hide behind their jokes and comedians expose themselves. If you agree, which one is braver?
I don't agree because I was thinking about this too. I think both are equally vulnerable, and anybody who writes or performs right in any medium, you got to be brave. You just have to be. There's no way about it, right? I think it's equal. So it could be anything from a stand-up poet, right, to the comedian. It's just you're putting yourself out there in some way. And like I said, a comedian, I think they take a little bit more liberty here. This is going back to that amp your character up by 10, right? So, you want to be yourself, and there has to be some truth in your character. That's why we fall for these comedians, right? But I can't picture a comedian being that way all day, every day of their life, right? Just they're amped up times 10, ready to go. As soon as they, get out of bed, that's them, right? There's no way. There's got to be some, a little bit of magic there, an illusion.
Okay. All right. Last question. Legacy. Who gets remembered? Will the comics Type 5 survive time or the comedian's cultural point of view be more timeless?
I think the comics Type 5 will survive a little more, just because what a comic does to me is so special, and how they perform and how they enlighten me personally is just it's kind of amazing, right? And a comedian is just as wonderful and talented as well, but i think I think a movie can definitely fade away versus if a comic made a lasting impression on you, you might go back to them 20, 30 years from now and go watch one of their sets again, versus a movie you've seen twice, maybe three times, you might be over it and never go back to it. I was thinking of an artist. I don't know if you know this artist from the '90s. He's from Texas, but he's just a wonderful stand-up. And I got to go back to some of his sets now. But somebody like Bill Hicks, who just was this kind of indie, raw kind of comic, and had this different view on things, and he could still transition a little bit into the comedy role, but it was definitely more stand-up. And he's somebody who still I remember to this day.
All right. Well, that's the reference. So where can everyone find you online, Daniel?
Oh yeah, you guys can find me, follow me at theleagueofwarriors.com. You can get updates on what we're doing and when our, hopefully when our short film and episodes get released.
All right. Awesome. All right. Well, for everybody watching, please like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.
Thanks for having me.